It happened on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I came back from work a little early, something I rarely did. I was expecting to relax for a bit before I had to head out again. So, when I walked in and didn't hear the usual sounds of Laura in the kitchen or the TV, I thought maybe she was out doing errands or meeting a friend. But as I walked further into the house, something caught my eye. In the kitchen, there was a teacup, one of the fancy ones Laura uses when she has friends over, sitting on the counter. It still had some tea in it, which meant it hadn't been there long. At first, I thought maybe Laura had a friend over and forgot to clean up. She's not the neatest person sometimes, and it wouldn't have been the first time I'd walked in on something like this. But then I noticed something odd. There was a faint smell of cologne in the air, something sweet and unfamiliar. It was faint, but it lingered enough to make me stop in my tracks. I checked the rest of the house. No one was there. Laura's car was parked in the driveway, so I knew she was home. My mind started racing. A coworker? A friend? The thought of another man didn't even cross my mind at first, but something about the cologne, the teacup, and the empty house made me feel uneasy. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I had been working long hours lately, and maybe I was just being paranoid. I decided to put it out of my head. I didn't want to overthink things. Maybe I was just tired or distracted. It had been a tough week at work, and I didn't want to ruin my mood over something that might not even matter. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A couple of days passed, and life returned to normal. Laura and I talked about our usual things, work, dinner plans, and even our attempts to get pregnant. But I kept coming back to that one moment in the kitchen. There was something there I couldn't ignore, but I pushed it to the back of my mind. I couldn't be one of those guys who get suspicious over nothing. But the nagging thought lingered, and my gut told me that something was off. I didn't want to bring it up yet. I didn't want to accuse her of anything without any proof. Then, the next week, more things started to pop up. I was out on a long bike ride, my hobby and a way for me to clear my head. I was getting back to the house a little earlier than usual when I noticed something strange. As I was unloading my bike from the car, I saw Laura's phone sitting on the table by the door. It wasn't the first time she'd left it lying around, but today I noticed something odd. There was a new text message on the screen. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "I miss you. I'll be home tonight, okay?" I froze. My heart started to race. I didn't want to look. I knew it was wrong to pry, but I couldn't help myself. I unlocked the phone. The conversation was brief, but it was clear. This was someone who wasn't just a friend, someone who was texting her in a way I had never seen before. There was a level of intimacy there that made my stomach drop. I had to take a deep breath before I could put the phone back on the table. I knew I needed to ask Laura about it, but I still wasn't ready to confront her. What if I was reading too much into this? What if it was just a mistake or someone from work? But the feeling in my chest told me otherwise. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I couldn't ignore this any longer. That evening, I decided to keep a closer eye on things. Laura came home late that night, earlier than I had expected, but she was acting strangely. She didn't talk about her day like she usually did. There was a nervous energy about her, like she was avoiding something. I didn't want to press too hard, but I could feel that there was something she wasn't telling me. We had dinner, watched a bit of TV, and then she went to bed earlier than usual. I stayed up for a bit, trying to wrap my head around everything. Was I just overreacting? Was I being that guy, the one who doubts everything? But the truth was, I didn't know anymore. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just worried about the texts. It was everything. The way she had been pulling away. The distance between us that seemed to be growing. I needed more. I needed to know if this was really happening. The next day, I decided to follow her. Not in a creepy way, but just enough to see if I could catch her in the act or maybe understand what was going on. I knew it wasn't healthy to start spying on her, but I couldn't just sit around and wait anymore. I had to know what she was up to. I followed her on a short errand that morning, making sure to keep a safe distance. She drove to a cafe in town. When she stepped out of the car, I noticed something I didn't expect. There was a man there, tall, dark-haired, and casually dressed. They greeted each other with a hug that was far too long to be just friendly. At that moment, it hit me. My suspicion was no longer just a feeling. It was the truth. She had been seeing someone else. It wasn't just innocent texting. She was having an affair. The man walked into the cafe with her. They didn't even glance around to see if anyone was watching. They were too wrapped up in their own world. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront her. But I didn't do it immediately. I gave her the rest of the day. I needed time to process. I needed time to figure out how to handle this. I had spent the last few years building this life, this future with her, and now it was all crumbling in front of me. That evening, after dinner, I finally spoke. My voice was calm, controlled, but I could feel the anger bubbling underneath. "Laura, I know about him," I said quietly. She looked up, her face paling. She didn't say anything at first, her lips trembling. But when she spoke, the words were rehearsed. "Mark, I can explain." "You don't need to," I said, cutting her off. "I know what's been going on." At that moment, everything changed. She broke down in front of me, sobbing uncontrollably, telling me it was a mistake, that she was confused, that she didn't mean for it to happen. But her words rang hollow. I had heard them too many times before in other stories, other situations. "I didn't want to hurt you, I swear," she cried, clutching my hand. "I didn't know what to do, I was so lost. Please, Mark. Please forgive me." But there was no forgiveness in me. Not yet. Not when everything I had worked for was torn apart by her lies. The tears, the apologies, they didn't change the reality. And that reality was this: I couldn't trust her anymore. I left the house that night, unable to stay. I couldn't look at her without seeing everything she had hidden from me. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about everything. The deceit. The lies. The betrayal of everything we had built. And in that moment, I knew my life was going to be very different from here on out. After that night of confrontation, I left the house. I couldn't bear to look at Laura, to listen to her apologies and excuses. Everything she said felt like a desperate attempt to hold on to something that was already gone. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the years of trust, love, and shared experiences that had all been shattered in an instant. I didn't want to stay in that house. I couldn't sleep in the bed we had shared, knowing what had happened. I needed space to think, to figure out what to do with my life now that it felt like everything had been turned upside down. So, I did the one thing I thought would give me some peace: I took time off from work. I called in for a week's leave, saying I needed to sort out some personal matters. I didn't tell anyone the real reason. My co-workers didn't need to know, and frankly, I didn't want to explain myself to anyone. During the first few days, I stayed at a small Airbnb outside of town. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. I spent the time thinking, cycling, reading, trying to clear my head. But no matter how much I tried to escape my thoughts, they always came back to one thing: Laura. How could I have missed the signs? How long had this been going on? Was she really so careless to think I wouldn't find out? By the third day, I was restless. I couldn't stay cooped up alone any longer. I decided to go for a ride, get some fresh air, clear my head a little more. I threw on my cycling gear, grabbed my helmet, and set off on one of my usual routes. Cycling had always been a way for me to escape, to think things through, and for the first time in a long time, I needed to do just that. I was pedaling along, lost in my thoughts, when I decided to make a detour. I didn't know why, but I found myself heading toward our neighborhood. Maybe it was the pull of familiarity, or maybe I was subconsciously hoping I would catch some glimpse of what was going on at home, something, anything, to reassure me that I was wrong, that I had misread the situation. As I rounded the corner, I slowed down as I passed our house. The blinds were closed, but the car was in the driveway. Laura's car. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but as I pulled up to the sidewalk, I saw something I hadn't anticipated. There, standing at the front door of the house, was Laura. But she wasn't alone. She was standing in the arms of another man. My heart dropped into my stomach. I could barely make sense of what I was seeing. I slowed down, coming to a stop on the sidewalk, trying to process the sight in front of me. There was no mistaking the embrace. They weren't just standing next to each other or having a casual conversation. No, they were holding each other, their bodies pressed together in a way that was far too intimate for someone who claimed they were just friends. Her head was nestled into his chest, and his hand was gently running through her hair. For a second, I thought my vision might be playing tricks on me. But as I blinked and took in the scene, it became painfully clear, she was with him. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was real, and I was watching her, the woman I had married, in the arms of another man. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to storm over there, confront them both, scream, make them understand the pain they were causing. But something stopped me. I don't know what it was, shock, disbelief, or maybe the sudden realization that I had already lost her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I just stood there on the sidewalk, frozen, watching them. For a few seconds, I felt completely paralyzed. I thought of all the times we'd shared together, our laughs, our quiet nights in, our plans for the future. And now, there she was, wrapped in another man's arms, as if everything I thought we had didn't matter. I was a wreck. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the lump in my throat, but I stayed where I was. My emotions were a jumbled mess, hurt, anger, confusion. I watched them for a few more moments, but then something in me snapped. I couldn't stay there, watching them be so normal. I couldn't be the man who stood idly by while my life crumbled. I had to do something, anything. Before I could think it through, I started pedaling away quickly, my heart pounding. I didn't even care if they saw me. I just had to get away. My legs were moving fast, my thoughts in a whirlwind. I wanted to scream, I wanted to hit something, but more than anything, I wanted answers. Where did I go wrong? What had I missed? What else had she been hiding? I rode for miles. I didn't know where I was going anymore, but I couldn't stop. I wanted to distance myself from everything, from the house, from Laura, from the betrayal that was clawing at me. The longer I pedaled, the more the reality of the situation hit me. It wasn't just that Laura had cheated. It wasn't just that she had lied. It was that she had been willing to throw away everything we had for something, someone else. The trust we had built, the future we had planned, it all felt like a lie. I had given her everything, and she had taken it all for granted. When I finally came to a stop, I was on a deserted trail, miles from home. My bike was parked against a tree, and I was sitting on a bench, trying to catch my breath. My body was exhausted from the ride, but my mind was racing. I had been living in a lie. I had spent the past few years building a future with someone who had already moved on, who had already started something new behind my back. The weight of it crushed me. I pulled out my phone and called Laura. But instead of dialing, I just stared at her name on the screen. I couldn't bring myself to call her. What would I even say? What could I say? The truth was already clear, and nothing I said now would change that. I sat there for a long time, contemplating my next move. I didn't want to confront her just yet. I wasn't ready to hear her lies. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. I had been betrayed, but I wasn't about to let that define me. I still had control over this situation. I just had to decide how I was going to play my hand. The days that followed my discovery of Laura in the arms of another man were a blur. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I spent more time cycling through the city, clearing my head, getting away from the pain. But as the hours stretched into days, I began to shift from pure heartbreak into something else, something darker. Anger. Betrayal. And with that anger came a realization, I wanted revenge. But not just any revenge. I wanted something that would make her regret everything. I wanted a public punishment. It wasn't enough for me to silently walk away, to let this slide and pretend I could move on. No, I had been humiliated. She had humiliated me. And I wasn't going to take it lying down. I knew I could confront her. I could shout at her, make her cry, maybe even ruin our last few months together with a public breakdown. But that didn't feel like enough. I wanted more. I wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions in the most public way possible. I had always been the type of person to think things through. I didn't want to lash out on impulse. But I also knew that what had been done to me couldn't be swept under the rug. I had seen too many stories online, stories of people confronting cheaters in private, stories of people suffering in silence. But that wasn't me. I wasn't going to let her get away with this quietly. If she was going to ruin our marriage, then she was going to face the consequences in front of everyone who mattered to her. I started planning. I knew Laura. I knew her friends, her social circle, the places she frequented. I had been there through all of it. I had seen how she acted in front of others, the face she put on for everyone. I would use that against her. I knew I wasn't the only one who had been wronged. There were so many people who had trusted Laura, who had no idea what she had been hiding. I wanted them to know the truth. I wanted to expose her betrayal in a way that would not only hurt her but make others see the truth. It wasn't just about exposing the affair, it was about shattering the illusion she had built around herself. She had been playing a role for so long, pretending to be the loving wife, the perfect partner. But I was going to tear that role apart. I spent the next few days gathering everything I had. I had the photos, the texts, the hotel receipts. But now, I needed to add to that evidence. I needed a way to make sure that when the truth came out, it would come crashing down with the force of a hurricane. So, I started taking screenshots of everything, texts between her and the other men, photos of the places she'd been with them. I even managed to get a video clip of her and one of the men at a restaurant, laughing and touching each other's hands in a way that made me sick to my stomach. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a pattern of behavior, something far deeper than I had initially realized. Once I had everything I needed, I went to work. I knew I couldn't just confront Laura at home. She would lie, deny everything, or manipulate the situation. No, I needed to make sure this was undeniable. And the more I thought about it, the more the idea grew. I created a public website. A page dedicated to exposing infidelity. I didn't care about the details of her personal life anymore. I wanted people to see who she truly was. The website would be anonymous at first, but anyone with access to it would know immediately who I was talking about. The site's URL was simple, betrayedwife.com. The homepage had a clean, stark design with only one sentence: I found out my wife was cheating on me, but I didn't know how far it went. Here's the truth. Under that headline, I uploaded the photos, videos, and messages I had collected. Every screenshot, every piece of evidence. I wanted it to be undeniable. I wanted to hurt her. I wanted her to see how it felt to have her dirty little secret laid bare for the world to see. Then, I shared the link. I sent it out to all of Laura's friends, her family, and her co-workers, everyone who mattered to her. I included personal notes in the emails I sent, making sure they knew exactly what they were about to see. You know my wife as a wonderful person, but here's what she's really been up to behind closed doors. I didn't wait for her to find out. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of confronting me before the damage was done. I wanted to see her reaction when the floodgates opened. When she realized that the whole world would know the truth. As the day went on, the site started getting traffic. People started leaving comments. Some were supportive, others were shocked. A few were angry. Laura's friends reached out to her directly, calling her out on social media. And then it all exploded. The website had gone viral. It wasn't just friends and family reading it. Strangers were commenting too. They shared their own stories of infidelity, some offering sympathy, others sending me messages of solidarity. I had no idea that this would reach so many people, but I didn't care. The fact that it was out there, that it was being seen, was enough for me. I checked the site obsessively throughout the day. The comments poured in. I had no idea she was capable of this, one of her co-workers wrote. Another one said, "I'm sorry you had to go through this. You deserve better." And one person, who I later realized was an old friend of hers, simply posted, "I knew something was off, but I didn't know it was this bad." The more I read, the more vindicated I felt. Laura's reputation, her carefully crafted image, was crumbling. And I was watching it happen in real time. That evening, as I sat at my computer, watching the responses roll in, I heard a knock on the door. It was Laura. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and eyes wide with shock. She looked at me, then at the screen, and then back at me. "Mark, what the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Why would you do this?" I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, watching as the reality of what I had done sank in. "You've been lying to me for months, Laura," I finally said, my voice low but steady. "This is what you deserve. This is the truth. You're not going to hide anymore." She broke down in front of me, falling to her knees. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake." I shook my head. "No. You knew exactly what you were doing. You made a choice." And with that, I left the room. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about me taking back control of my life. It was about making sure she understood that there were consequences to her actions. No more lies. No more pretending. The website wasn't just a public punishment for Laura. It was a statement to anyone who had ever been wronged in the way I had been. It was a reminder that actions have consequences, and sometimes, the truth has a way of exposing everything. The fallout from the website I created was more intense than I had imagined. I never thought it would escalate the way it did. When Laura found out, her entire world came crashing down. But it didn't end with the humiliation of her personal life being exposed. Everything she had worked for started unraveling too. The first blow came at her workplace. Laura had been a high-level manager at a marketing firm, respected by many of her colleagues, or so I thought. When the website went viral, it didn't take long for her co-workers to start confronting her, both online and in person. It wasn't just the people close to her. The entire office had seen the site. And it wasn't long before her employer got wind of it too. Her reputation, once carefully built, had been shredded in public. The firm's clients began pulling out, and the management team couldn't afford to have the drama following them around. She was called into a meeting with HR. I remember her calling me that evening, her voice shaky and panicked. "Mark, I've been fired. They said it's because of the website, that it's damaged the company's image." There was a part of me that felt a rush of satisfaction, a small victory in knowing she had faced the consequences of her actions. But another part of me, the more rational part, knew that this wasn't enough. Laura had lost everything, and now, she was left without a job and without a future at her company. I didn't feel sorry for her, not yet, at least. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But as I processed everything, I realized it wasn't just about punishing her. It was about making sure I didn't get caught in the wreckage. The divorce came soon after that. We had already agreed on it informally, but I wanted to wrap everything up as quickly as possible. I didn't want to drag out the emotional roller coaster of waiting for the inevitable. I didn't want to be tied to Laura any longer, emotionally or legally. I hired a lawyer, and we moved forward swiftly. The paperwork was signed, and in a matter of weeks, our marriage was officially over. It wasn't the way I had ever imagined things would end. I had hoped for a life with Laura, a family, a future. But what I had gotten instead was betrayal and heartache. As the divorce papers were finalized, a strange sense of relief washed over me. I wasn't sure if it was the weight of all the lies finally lifting off my shoulders or if it was the fact that I was free from a relationship that had been slowly suffocating me. Either way, I knew I had to keep moving forward. It wasn't just about getting away from Laura. I needed a fresh start, something completely different from the life I had been living. I had been stuck in a routine for years, work, home, repeat. Everything had felt predictable and safe, but now that I was free, I had a new burst of energy. I had to take advantage of it. I needed to change my life in a way that felt coordinated, purposeful. It wasn't just about running away from the past. It was about building something new from the ground up. I decided to focus on the things I loved, things I had put on hold for too long. Cycling had always been my escape, but I hadn't been taking it seriously. I decided I was going to make it a bigger part of my life. I signed up for a long-distance race that was coming up in the fall. It was a challenge, and I needed it. Training would give me a goal, something to work toward while I figured out the next steps in my life. But I didn't stop there. I also decided to make a major change in my career. I had always been interested in web design and development, but I had never taken it seriously. I had been stuck in a job I wasn't passionate about. It was steady, sure, but it wasn't fulfilling. With the divorce behind me, I took the plunge. I signed up for an intensive coding boot camp. It felt like the right time to do something new, to redirect all the anger and frustration I had been carrying into something positive. Coding would be my new challenge, just like cycling. Both would push me outside my comfort zone. The first few weeks of focusing on myself, my goals, and my new projects were filled with a surge of energy. It was like waking up from a long sleep. My mornings were dedicated to cycling, and my afternoons were spent in front of my computer, learning how to build websites. The sense of purpose I had been missing for so long started to return. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. But then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while I was taking a break from coding and scrolling through the news on my phone, I saw a familiar name. It was Laura. A headline caught my attention: ex-marketing executive fired after affair exposed online. I clicked on the article without thinking. It was a full account of the fallout from her firing, the damage to her career, and the public backlash she had faced. The article wasn't kind to her. It painted her as someone who had destroyed her own life and career through a series of poor decisions. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I hadn't set out to ruin her life, but in a way, I had. She had ruined herself, but I had exposed it to the world. The article also mentioned her having trouble finding a new job, given the nature of her public humiliation. She had lost more than just a job, she had lost her professional reputation. It was a harsh reality to face, but it didn't change the fact that she had done this to herself. It was at that moment that I realized something about myself. The revenge I had taken, while sweet in the moment, hadn't brought me the closure I thought it would. Sure, Laura had been publicly punished, but what had I really gained from it? I had moved on with my life, but was I really moving forward, or was I just caught up in my need for retribution? I had already started building something for myself, something that was focused on my future, not my past. And that realization gave me clarity. I didn't need to watch Laura suffer anymore. The damage was done. The truth was out there, and I had won. Now, I needed to focus on what came next, my career, my health, my happiness. The past was behind me, and I was done letting it dictate my life. I had found a new energy, and I was determined to channel that energy into something that would make my life worth living again. With everything behind me, I moved forward, one petal at a time, one line of code at a time, building the future I had always wanted. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine to navigate. And I was going to make sure it led to something bigger and better than anything I had ever known.